Hi, I want to take a few minutes today to talk to you about some of the principles behind this inquiry-based online writing class. A couple of you posed specific questions in Blog 1 about just how inquiry-based learning will work in an online class, and I'm imagining there's some interest in how this would work in a writing classroom as well. So I'm going to talk through some of the principles behind this kind of learning, the differences between the context that the text What's Worth Knowing was written in and our learning context at Wayne State, and then also share some strategies and some tensions for how this is going to play out in our classroom, as well as some of the questions that have emerged from initial writing and discussions in classes. I'll start with a couple of key principles that drive the idea of the inquiry environment. One is that the course curriculum is driven by what students want to know and need to know, and that need is not administratively determined, but instead comes from what is driving students' minds and their attention and their motivation. The second principle is that students learn how to ask meaningful questions, that they can figure out what to ask questions about, how to phrase those questions, and how to develop a line of inquiry that builds upon itself. But there are some differences between the context of when Postman and Weingartner's text, and you read one excerpt, What's Worth Knowing, from a longer book called Teaching as a Subversive Activity. There are differences between their context and the context that we're working in, and that's important for us to acknowledge. So, the original text is written almost 50 years ago in response to a top-down educational system. They are looking for some revolution in education, but they're focused on K-12 education. They're also writing as people who have worked in the schools, but essentially as philosophers and critics, imagining a new inquiry pedagogy, and they're doing this through the context of a book. We're engaging an inquiry environment in the writing classroom. We're working in 2016, responding to a top-down educational system, but focused very specifically on college composition, not on the wide scope of education. We are writing students and teacher enacting the inquiry pedagogy within the bounds of a prescribed curriculum and in response to course learning outcomes. So I see us as working a little bit bottom up in a top-down system. And so I'll talk in a minute about some of the tensions that go along with that. One of those tensions is the course learning outcomes that we are required to work on in our English 1020 classes. All students in English 1020 will demonstrate competencies in reading, writing, researching, and reflecting by the end of the semester. Each of these learning outcomes is comprised of a number of different clauses that lay out key elements of learning. So, for example, in writing, it's not just about being able to demonstrate that you can write effective analyses and arguments, but also that you're able to use a flexible writing process so that as you move between genres of writing or move between writing situations, you show that you understand that not every writing situation needs to be approached the same way. We'll also work in the class on learning how to navigate scholarly texts, how to identify authors' arguments and rhetorical appeals. We'll work on finding effective secondary sources and integrating those into your writing. And we'll use reflection as a tool for learning. Our second tension is that the classes that we're working in have a common syllabus. Every section of English 1020 at our university works on 5 projects: the rhetorical analysis, the iSearch, the researched argument, the infographic, and the reflective argument essay. So we'll be working through these 5 projects. One of the tensions that we'll have to figure out is how do your individual questions work in a situation where the key components of an assignment are predetermined for you. Finally, we have a major tension in the sense that this is an online writing class. We're dealing with asynchronous learning. I create videos for you and set up learning materials and tasks for you to do each week, but you all complete those things at whatever point in the week is most convenient for you. And there's no point where we all meet together in a classroom to talk through ideas. Most of the communication in the class is one-to-one. I present something to the whole group, but you and I might email each other or might give responses to each other in a forum in the Blackboard discussion board, but you don't often get the chance to talk with each other. I'll create some situations, like in peer response, where you get to give feedback to each other, but again, there's not a time where we're all together in a room getting to hear each other's ideas at the same time. So the reflexivity that would happen in a face-to-face classroom doesn't happen in our online writing class in the same way. Finally, in an online writing classroom, the discourse is writing heavy. So even conversations are spread apart by time. You might write me an emailed question, but my response to you might come 3 or 4 hours later, and then you might choose not to respond, or your response back to me might come several days after that. And we don't have the opportunity always to read each other's faces and see where questions might be emerging. I'm confident we'll uncover more tensions, although we'll also be developing strategies for working through those. So here's how we will approach enacting inquiry-based learning in our online writing classroom. The first way is that your questions about academic writing and rhetoric will be central to the course and drive the weekly discussions. I'll address those explicitly in my weekly videos as they're relevant to the work that we're doing in class that week. You'll also write about your thoughts on these questions in your in-project and post-project reflections. Finally, when it's relevant to our conversations about your individual projects, these questions might come up during our conferences. You're also going to practice writing and asking your own research questions, thinking about what's worth knowing, and being able to articulate that motivation in your writing. Your research questions will develop from the reflective thinking that you do surrounding Project 1, the rhetorical analysis, and the preparation work that I ask you to do for Project 2, the iSearch. And then you're going to carry those research questions out through Projects 2, 3, and 4, which ask you to present and write through research in different ways and through different genres. Here I have questions about academic writing and rhetoric that have come up in the Blog 1 posts that were due over the weekend, and also questions that emerged in a discussion with the students in my face-to-face class. On the left-hand side, I've synthesized a number of the questions posted in Blog 1 to try to get down to 5 essential questions that students in the online writing classroom wanted to know about. Now, this doesn't mean we'll talk about that we won't talk about the other questions that you had, but some of those we'll talk about individually, or they'll just emerge along the way. On the right-hand side are the questions that students in my face-to-face class asked, and I'll share your questions with them, and they'll be worth thinking about as well. I also want to talk for a second about why we're reading texts about math in Project 1, the rhetorical analysis. Where does this question, why is math important to college students' learning, even come from? And why are we writing about it in an English class? Well, the first reason is personal. I have an interest in learning about math throughout my life. I've always been okay at math. Not awesome, but okay at it, and I find it super interesting. My children are also keenly interested in math. They like doing math problems for fun. They're little kids right now, and I'm interested in thinking about how learning about math is going to impact their pathways through education. In our university context, we've had a recent change in the math requirement as part of general education at Wayne State. That conversation has been happening in the last years, and a recent change was just integrated. And so this question, why is math important to college students learning, is something that's relevant to all of you. Finally, this is an interrogation in line with the kinds of questions posed in Postman and Weingartner's text, What's Worth Knowing? Why do we learn about the things that we're asked to learn about in school, and why do we care about them? So the texts that I've selected are on the topic of math and learning and math requirements and the place of math in education, or what's valuable about learning about mathematics. And we're going to use those just to start to think about developing inquiries and reading texts and understanding how authors phrase arguments about a text, construct those, present research, craft their ethos, etc. So as questions start to surface for you while you're doing reading and writing for the class, while you're driving in your car, while you're talking with your friends or family members, find a place where you can keep track of those questions. They may be things that are worth us talking about through blog posts or through weekly videos. They might be the kinds of questions that you think you might want to address in your research throughout the projects that we do this semester.